How we doing today, Planet Earth? My name is Ian Fox, and today we are going to be discussing yet another franchise that I believe is in desperate need of saving, as it has been irrelevant for a very long time now. This series is known as LittleBigPlanet, and it has been one of my personal favorite PlayStation franchises ever since it first came out all the way back in 2008. When the first game came out, it was an instant hit with everyone that picked it up, as it offered really fun platformer gameplay that also allowed for so much creativity with its character and level creation mechanics. Through the game's efforts to push its players to be creative, it cultivated a very large and strong community around it that was very passionate about sharing their creations with everyone else, and would ultimately shape what LBP would become many years into the future. If you're interested in seeing an in-depth review / nostalgia piece for the first game and the ultimate fate of the series as a whole, feel free to click in the top right corner of the screen right about now. It's an earlier video of mine, but I feel like it's still totally worth watching if you're interested. Eventually, LittleBigPlanet 2 released a few years later in 2011, and it was pretty much the perfect sequel. It did all of the same things but better, and eventually the world would be introduced to LittleBigPlanet 3 when that was released in 2014. In 6 short years, we had an entire trilogy of some of the best platformer games ever made, and one of the coolest features that LBP 2 and 3 had was that the data from every game could be carried over into the next game in the series. If you played LBP 1 when that came out, everything you collected and created could be carried over into LBP 2, and all of the things you did in LBP 2, in addition to what you had already carried over from LBP 1, could be carried over into LBP 3. A lot of times, when new games come out, there are a lot of people that will pick up the most recent title in a series and won't ever play the ones that came before simply because they aren't the newest thing out there. LBP as a whole encouraged everyone to play the whole series because each new game basically just built upon the last, making the possibilities of how you can apply your creative mind even more abundant the more you played. From 2008 to 2013, the LittleBigPlanet community had grown exponentially, and together we had created millions of levels, generating countless of hours of fun to be had, but there is a point in this story where things would begin to go downhill. I say 2013 because there were a couple of factors that played into the eventual downfall of the franchise, and one that I feel is often overlooked is the release of the PlayStation 4. For many players out there, we had been playing on our PlayStation 3s for nearly 8 years by the time the PS4 came around, so it was high time to move on. The problem that the PS4 has always had, though, is that it doesn't have any level of backwards compatibility, so that meant anyone moving on to the next generation hardware would have to leave their library of PS3 games behind. I know it's also pretty common for people to not hold on to their older stuff once it's no longer the current thing, whether it be because they need the money, space, or simply don't care about keeping their more dated consoles and games because they only want to play the new stuff. All of the players that fell into this category would move on, taking a chunk of their respective communities with them. There is also the other portion of players that I fell into, where I still had and loved all the old stuff, but getting a new console after release is really exciting. And the PS4 had a really solid lineup of launch games, so I didn't really feel the need to go back just yet. The lack of backwards compatibility on the PS4 alone would hurt many online communities in games on the PS3, with LBP being one of them. Without being able to play any of the LBP games on the new system, the first 2 games kinda just floated off into the back of our minds as we continued to engage in newer gaming experiences. The final nail in the coffin that really made LBP lose any shred of relevance that it once had was in 2014 with the launch of LittleBigPlanet 3. It's really unfortunate because LBP 3 was meant to be the game that revitalized the franchise as well as bring in new players, but when the game launched, it wasn't up to snuff. Once I got my hands on the game, it didn't take very long for me to realize that it more than likely wasn't ready for release, as it had a lot of glitches, would crash all the time, many had their save files corrupted, which forced them to delete their game saves altogether, and the online functionality barely worked at all. What makes all of this even worse is that at its core, LBP 3 is a pretty solid entry for the series. It brought a lot of new things to the table, a lot like LBP 2 did, some of the most notable being the 3 new characters you can play as, aside from classic Sackboy, that all had their own special abilities. As was the status quo for these games, LBP3 brought forward all kinds of new ways to be creative, making the already endless possibilities even more unlimited. But because of the issues that plagued the game on release, many, myself included, didn't stick around for very long. Many of the players that loved LBP since the beginning moved on, didn't look back, and the IP was sort of just forgotten about. Easily the biggest factor into why things went down the way that they did is that LBP3 was developed by Sumo Digital, an entirely different studio from Media Molecule that made LBP1 and 2. Looking back now, it's likely that Sumo Digital was rushed by corporate to get the game out for the holiday season, as, like I said, the game itself fits pretty well into the trilogy, but considering the fact that LBP3 was the first and only game I had ever played that was made by them, it left a pretty sour taste in my mouth. For many years following the LBP3 debacle, there wasn't any news regarding the series as a whole until September 13th, 2021, where it was announced that following multiple DDoS attacks against the LBP servers, that the online functionality for LBP 1, 2, and 3 on the PlayStation 3 would be shutting down permanently, and the ability to experience everything that the community had built there together would be gone forever. For the last couple of years since that announcement, we've only had access to what's left of the community and its creations through LBP3's multiplayer, but as of January 2024, the online for that game has been quote-unquote temporarily shut down as well due to the ill intent of modders. Here we are, just a couple of years past the closure of the online for the older games, and it seems that history may very well be repeating itself, because what's left of the LBP3 community is fearful that this may be the official end of the series as a whole. With all that being said, I can't really disagree with that assessment, which is why I feel that now more than ever, LittleBigPlanet is in dire need of something that is going to bring this franchise back into the limelight where it truly deserves to be. It seems that, at least to some extent, Sony has realized how irrelevant LBP and Sackboy as a character have become over the years, as there has been a small effort to revitalize the idea of Sackboy in the minds of his fans. In 2020, alongside the release of the PlayStation 5, a little game known as Sackboy: A Big Adventure came out as a launch title for the system, and was developed by the previously mentioned Sumo Digital. Despite the fact that A Big Adventure is not an LBP game, it's still a pretty solid experience. When it came out, it received a pretty good amount of positive reception, as it offers a lot of fun platformer gameplay in a 3D format, which is actually a pretty cool twist on the formula, since every other game Sackboy has appeared in have been 2D side-scrollers. Although the game itself was pretty good and changed how I personally look at Sumo Digital as a developer, there was one common point that just about every longtime fan of Sackboy had to say about it, and it was that Sackboy: A Big Adventure, while good like I already said, is not a LittleBigPlanet game. This new spin-off title really does do so much right, but the biggest part of what made the character and the franchise he originated from so iconic in the first place was the ability to create your own levels to share with the community, which ultimately allowed for near infinite replayability. Sackboy: A Big Adventure is just a platformer game through and through, and not much else. I played through it just once, got my fill, and never picked it up again. Still to this day, I've never even really had the urge. I've always kind of looked at this game like it only exists for Sony to dip their toe into the water and gauge interest a little bit, because even though it was a success, it's still not really talked about all that much within the remaining LBP community. With all of that being said, I believe that the new spin-off title is simply not enough. It just didn't make enough of a splash, and because of that, I feel that it's the wrong direction to take the character. Taking this into consideration, there are really only a few avenues that Sony can go down with Sackboy to make the most out of the character, and easily the biggest one would have to be making LittleBigPlanet 4. Believe me, I know that sounds stupid to say, because obviously, if you want to revitalize a franchise, you just keep it going, but I have to bring it up in the video because, as far as we know, Sony has yet to take the hint. If Sackboy: A Big Adventure proved anything, it's that there is still a great demand for the next entry in the LBP series, and it's honestly baffling to me that it's taken so long to get another game out. After the shenanigans that ensued when LittleBigPlanet 3 launched, a majority of people who had never played a game developed by Sumo Digital before just wrote them off, but their more recent spin-off title has given me faith that they can handle LBP. While I wouldn't necessarily be bothered by Sumo Digital developing LittleBigPlanet 4, in a perfect world, Sony would have the original creators over at Media Molecule work on the title instead. While trying to figure out ways to bring LBP back to its former glory for this video, I didn't think it would be possible for Media Molecule to work on the next entry because after the release of LBP 2, their focus shifted to developing a platform for others to make their own games, which eventually culminated in Dreams for the PS4, which is exactly that. However, to my surprise, what I very quickly learned was that the folks over at actually cut support for Dreams on September 1st of 2023. Meaning, for the past few months, the studio is likely to have been hard at work on yet another project, and I have to say, it would be really nice if they were working on LBP 4. For LBP 4 to be as successful as its predecessors, I feel that there are a couple of aspects from those older titles that must be present to ensure not only the longevity of the game, but the same level of replayability as well. One of the most important things we need to consider when trying to stretch out the longevity is how they would monetize the game, because we are currently living in the age of the Battle Pass, and I've done a lot of thinking about this, and what I've concluded is that a Battle Pass type system would not work. I just don't see a way that a system like that could be implemented into a game like LBP and the game not end up just completely rot with levels being created with the sole purpose of point boosting to level up as fast as possible in the Battle Pass. I feel that the safest and most logical direction to move here would actually be to not make any changes to how the series has been monetized in the past. I've always loved how the developers behind LBP were seemingly always creating and releasing costume packs that, for the most part, were always really well designed and very fairly priced. Even today, there are still a lot of really good looking costumes available for LBP 3 that you can pick up for just $1.99 a piece or $5.99 for an entire costume pack if there are more than one costumes available for a specific theme. When you look at the prices for most cosmetics in most games that come out in this day and age, you're looking at up to $20 for a single skin, so these prices have actually always been more than fair for what you're getting. One of the coolest things about the costume packs that they sell is that over the years there have been plenty of licensed cosmetics like the Pirates of the Caribbean, Horizon Zero Dawn, Metal Gear Solid, Assassin's Creed, Adventure Time, and so many more. What's even cooler is that every time a holiday or milestone came around for one of the games, they'd give out a free costume for everyone to download at no additional cost. Another thing that they'd release on occasion to coincide with a costume pack were level creation kits, which basically just added a few new levels into the game that were full of all sorts of stickers and materials that you could collect for use in your own level creations. These would go for a pretty minimal price as well, of around $2 to $3, and sometimes were also given out for free. The prices for these items are still more than fair for both the customer and the game overall, and if the developers were to keep the exact same system for the next entry, I can see the game making plenty of money over time without having to rip off the players with overpriced cosmetics and content. The other really important aspect that has been a staple of the series for a very long time is the ability to transfer existing data from the older games. I don't have to go too in-depth with this part, as it's really pretty simple, but this mechanic has been there since LBP 2 came out, and I believe it's so essential to the formula that it must be included in LBP 4. Part of what has always made LBP so great is that each game builds upon the last, so when it comes to the fourth installment, the story should be no different. When I boot up LBP 4, I want to be able to play all of the levels that I grew up playing alongside all of the new ones that come along with all of the new mechanics. Of course, this basically means that every single asset from all of the previous games needs to be retouched and retextured to meet the current standards for the visuals of today. I get that this might sound pretty unnecessary when you figure that a very small margin of people are going to pick up a PlayStation 3 along with both LBP 1 and 2 to play those games and collect all the costumes and materials to use in LBP 4, so if you did have that thought, you would be 100% correct. This is why I believe that it would be a phenomenal idea to remaster LBP 1, 2, and 3 in a bundled LittleBigPlanet collection for release on the PlayStation 5. This isn't to say that any of these games look bad by any means, because that couldn't be further from the truth. In all honesty, all of these games still look really good, even on the old hardware, because LBP as a franchise has never really been all that demanding when it comes to the visuals. However, I have played all three of them somewhat recently, and you can tell that in between LBP 1 and 2 there was a small advancement in graphics, but LBP 3 in comparison does look a bit better due to the more powerful hardware for the PS4. Like I said earlier on, LBP is a franchise that encourages you to play every game so that way you can acquire all the goodies in all of the story levels for use later on. Not only would this give retexturing all of the assets from the older games a purpose, but it would bring the entire series back to the forefront, allowing the community to thrive like it once was, with the added bonus of re-releasing LBP 3 alongside its predecessors, giving the developers a chance to fix what was and still is broken. At the time of making this video, LittleBigPlanet may very well be on the verge of disappearing for good, and I would be really disappointed if Sony didn't take action and step in to protect the IP and make an effort to bring some life back to the dead. I am well aware that this franchise was originally made for kids, and I just so happened to fit right within that demographic when it first came out, but that won't stop me from trying to put forward ideas that can make it as popular as it once was. I am currently pushing 25 years old, so I am well out of the age range that this IP is targeting. But if there's one thing I do know from experience, it's that LBP is so accessible that even the ladies that don't play can sit down and enjoy it, which offers a whole new kind of experience with these goofy little games. I'd be very interested to hear all of your opinions on this in the comment section down below. Do you want to see LBP return to its former glory, or do you think the franchise had its chance a long time ago? You all know how I feel by now, but if we want to make a change and see these games make a triumphant return, we need to be vocal and let Sony know what we want. If you enjoyed this video, please feel free to leave a like and subscribe if you want to stick around. I look forward to hearing all of your thoughts and opinions down below as usual. I appreciate you all for watching, and I'll catch you guys later.